The Ivy League is a collegiate athletic conference comprising sports teams from 8 private institutions of higher education in the Northeastern United States. The conference name is also commonly used to refer to those 8 schools as a group. The 8 institutions are Brown University, Columbia University, Cornell University, Dartmouth College, Harvard University, Princeton University, the University of Pennsylvania, and Yale University. The term Ivy League has connotations of academic excellence, selectivity in admissions, and social elitism. The term became official after the formation of the NCAA Division I athletic conference in 1954. The use of the phrase is no longer limited to athletics, and now represents an educational philosophy inherent to the nation's oldest schools. 7 of the 8 schools were founded during the United States colonial period. The exception is Cornell, which was founded in 1865. Ivy League institutions account for 7 of the 9 colonial colleges chartered before the American Revolution. Ivy League schools are viewed as some of the most prestigious, and are ranked among the best universities worldwide. All 8 universities place in the top 20 of the U.S. News & World Report 2014 university rankings, including the top 4 schools and 6 of the top 10. Each school receives millions of dollars in research grants and other subsidies from federal and state government. Undergraduate enrollments range from about 4,000 to 14,000, making them larger than those of a typical private liberal arts college and smaller than a typical public state university. Total enrollments, including graduate students, range from approximately 6,100 at Dartmouth to over 20,000 at Columbia, Cornell, Harvard, and Penn. Ivy League financial endowments range from Brown's $2.7 billion to Harvard's $32.3 billion, the largest financial endowment of any academic institution in the world. Members, history, year founded, note, 6 of the 8 Ivy League universities consider their founding dates to be simply the date that they received their charters and thus became legal corporations with the authority to grant academic degrees. Harvard University uses the date that the legislature of the Massachusetts Bay Colony formally allocated funds for the creation of a college. The University of Pennsylvania initially considered its founding date to be 1740. This is the year which appears on the first iteration of the university seal. Religious affiliation refers to financial sponsorship, formal association with, and promotion by, a religious denomination. All of the schools in the Ivy League are private and not currently associated with any religion. Origin of the name. Students have long revered the ivied walls of older colleges. Planting the ivy was a customary Class Day ceremony at many colleges in the 1800s. In 1893 an alumnus told the Harvard Crimson, in 1850, Class Day was placed upon the university calendar. The custom of planting the ivy, while the ivy oration was delivered, arose about this time. At Penn, graduating seniors started the custom of planting ivy at a university building each spring in 1873 and that practice was formally designated as Ivy Day in 1874. Ivy planting ceremonies are reported for Yale, Simmons, Bryn Mawr and many others. Princeton's Ivy Club was founded in 1879. The first usage of ivy in reference to a group of colleges is from sports writer Stanley Woodward. A proportion of our Eastern Ivy colleges are meeting little fellows another Saturday before plunging into the strife and the turmoil. According to the book Dictionary of Word and Phrase Origins, author William Morris writes that Stanley Woodward actually took the term from fellow New York Tribune sports writer Corswell Adams. Morris writes that during the 1930s, the Fordham University football team was running roughshod over all its opponents. One day in the sports room at the Tribune, the merits of Fordham's football team were being compared to those of Princeton and Columbia. Adams remarked disparagingly of the latter two, saying they were only Ivy League. Woodward, the sports editor of the Tribune, picked up the term and printed the next day. Note though that in the above quote Woodward used the term Ivy College, not Ivy League as Adams is said to have used, so there is a discrepancy in this theory, although it seems certain the term Ivy College and shortly later Ivy League acquired its name from the sports world. The first known instance of the term Ivy League being used appeared in the Christian Science Monitor on February 7, 1935. Several sports writers and other journalists used the term shortly later to refer to the older colleges, those along the northeastern seaboard of the United States, chiefly the 9 institutions with origins dating from the colonial era, together with the United States Military Academy, the United States Naval Academy, and a few others. These schools were known for their long-standing traditions in intercollegiate athletics, often being the first schools to participate in such activities. However, at this time, none of these institutions made efforts to form an athletic league. The Ivy League universities are also called the Ancient Eight, or simply the Ivies. A common folk etymology attributes the name to the Roman numerals for 4, asserting that there was such a sports league originally with 4 members. The Morris Dictionary of Word and Phrase Origins helped to perpetuate this belief. The supposed 4 league was formed over a century ago and consisted of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and a 4th school that varies depending on who is telling the story. However, it is clear that Harvard, Princeton, Yale and Columbia met on November 23, 1876 at the so-called Mass-Orwart Convention to decide on uniform rules for the emerging game of American football, which rapidly spread. Pre-Ivy League. 7 of the Ivy League schools were founded before the American Revolution. Cornell was founded just after the American Civil War. These 7 were the primary colleges in the northern and middle colonies, and their early faculties and founding boards were largely, therefore, drawn from other Ivy League institutions. There were also some British graduates from the University of Cambridge, the University of Oxford, the University of St Andrews, the University of Edinburgh, and elsewhere on their boards. Similarly, the founder of the College of William and Mary, in 1693, was a British graduate of the University of Edinburgh. Cornell provided Stanford University with its first president. The influence of these institutions on the founding of other colleges and universities is notable. This included the Southern Public College movement, which blossomed in the decades surrounding the turn of the 19th century when Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina and Virginia established what became the flagship universities for each of these states. In 1801 a majority of the first board of trustees for what became the University of South Carolina were Princeton alumni. They appointed Jonathan Maxey, a Brown graduate, as the university's first president. Thomas Cooper, an Oxford alumnus and University of Pennsylvania faculty member, became the second president of the South Carolina College. The founders of the University of California came from Yale, hence the school colors of University of California are Yale blue and California gold. Some of the Ivy League schools have identifiable Protestant roots, while others were founded as non-sectarian schools. Church of England King's College broke up during the Revolution and was reformed as public non-sectarian Columbia College. In the early 19th century, the specific purpose of training Calvinist ministers was handed off to theological seminaries, but a denominational tone and such relics as compulsory chapel often lasted well into the 20th century. Penn and Brown were officially founded as non-sectarian schools. Brown's charter promised no religious tests and full liberty of conscience, but placed control in the hands of a board of 22 Baptists, 5 Quakers, 4 Congregationalists, and 5 Episcopalians. Cornell has been strongly non-sectarian from its founding. Ivy League is sometimes used as a way of referring to an elite class, even though institutions such as Cornell University were among the first in the United States to reject racial and gender discrimination in their admissions policies. This sense dates back to at least 1935. Novels and memoirs attest this sense, as a social elite. To some degree independent of the actual schools. After the Second World War, the present Ivy League institutions slowly widened their selection of students. They had always had distinguished faculties. Some of the first Americans with doctorates had taught for them. But they now decided that they could not both be world-class research institutions and be competitive in the highest ranks of American college sport. In addition, the schools experienced the scandals of any other big-time football programs, although more quietly. History of the Athletic League. The first formal athletic league involving eventual Ivy League schools was created in 1870 with the formation of the Rowing Association of American Colleges. The RAAC hosted a de facto national championship in rowing during the period 1870–1894. In 1895, Cornell, Columbia, and Penn founded the Intercollegiate Rowing Association, which remains the oldest collegiate athletic organizing body in the U.S. To this day, the IRA Championship Regatta determines the national champion in rowing, and all of the Ivies are regularly invited to compete. A basketball league was later created in 1902, when Columbia, Cornell, Harvard, Yale and Princeton formed the Eastern Intercollegiate Basketball League. They were later joined by Penn and Dartmouth. In 1906, the organization that eventually became the National Collegiate Athletic Association was formed, primarily to formalize rules for the emerging sport of football. But of the 39 original member colleges in the NCAA, only 2 of them later became Ivies. Before the formal establishment of the Ivy League, there was an unwritten and unspoken agreement among certain Eastern colleges on athletic relations. In 1935, the Associated Press reported on an example of collaboration between the schools. The athletic authorities of the so-called Ivy League are considering drastic measures to curb the increasing tendency toward riotous attacks on goalposts and other encroachments by spectators on playing fields. Despite such collaboration, the universities did not seem to consider the formation of the league as imminent. Ian Berry, Cornell's manager of athletics, reported the situation in January 1936 as follows. I can say with certainty that in the last 5 years and markedly in the last 3 months there has been a strong drift among the 8 or 10 universities of the East which see a good deal of one another in sport toward a closer bond of confidence and cooperation and toward the formation of a common front against the threat of a breakdown in the ideals of amateur sport in the interests of supposed expediency. Please do not regard that statement as implying the organization of an Eastern Conference or even a poetic Ivy League. That sort of thing does not seem to be in the cards at the moment. Within a year of this statement and having held month-long discussions about the proposal, on December 3, 1936, the idea of the formation of an Ivy League gained enough traction among the undergraduate bodies of the universities that the Columbia Daily Spectator, the Cornell Daily Sun, the Dartmouth, the Harvard Crimson, the Daily Pennsylvanian, the Daily Princetonian and the Yale Daily News would simultaneously run an editorial entitled Now is the Time, encouraging the 7 universities to form the league in an effort to preserve the ideals of athletics. Part of the editorial read as follows. The Ivy League exists already in the minds of a good many of those connected with football, and we fail to see why the 7 schools concerned should be satisfied to let it exist as a purely nebulous entity where there are so many practical benefits which would be possible under definite organized association. The 7 colleges involved fall naturally together by reason of their common interests and similar general standards, and by dint of their established national reputation they are in a particularly advantageous position to assume leadership for the preservation of the ideals of intercollegiate athletics. The Ivies have been competing in sports as long as intercollegiate sports have existed in the United States. Rowing teams from Harvard and Yale met in the first sporting event held between students of 2 U.S. colleges on Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, on August 3, 1852. Harvard's team, the Oneida, won the race and was presented with trophy black walnut oars from then-presidential nominee General Franklin Pierce. The proposal did not succeed. On January 11, 1937, the athletic authorities at the schools rejected the possibility of a heptagonal league in football such as these institutions maintain in basketball, baseball and track. However, they noted that the league has such promising possibilities that it may not be dismissed and must be the subject of further consideration. In 1945 the presidents of the 8 schools signed the first Ivy Group Agreement, which set academic, financial, and athletic standards for the football teams. The principles established reiterated those put forward in the Harvard-Yale-Princeton President's Agreement of 1916. The Ivy Group Agreement established the core tenet that an applicant's ability to play on a team would not influence admissions decisions. The members of the group reaffirmed their prohibition of athletic scholarships. athletes shall be admitted as students and awarded financial aid only on the basis of the same academic standards and economic need as are applied to all other students. In 1954, the date generally accepted as the birth of the Ivy League, the presidents extended the Ivy Group agreement to all intercollegiate sports effective with the 1955-56 basketball season. As part of the transition, Brown, the only Ivy that hadn't joined the EIBL, did so for the 1954-55 season. A year later, the Ivy League absorbed the EIBL. The Ivy League claims the EIBL's history as its own. Through the EIBL, it is the oldest basketball conference in Division I. As late as the 1960s, many of the Ivy League universities' undergraduate programs remained open only to men, with Cornell the only one to have been co-educational from its founding and Columbia being the last to become co-educational. Before they became co-educational, many of the Ivy schools maintained extensive social ties with nearby Seven Sisters women's colleges, including weekend visits, dances and parties inviting Ivy and Seven Sisters students to mingle. This was the case not only at Barnard College and Radcliffe College, which are adjacent to Columbia and Harvard, but at more distant institutions as well. The movie Animal House includes a satiric version of the formerly common visits by Dartmouth men to Massachusetts to meet Smith and Mount Holyoke women, a drive of more than 2 hours. As noted by Irene Harworth, Mindy Malin, and Elizabeth Deborah, the Seven Sisters was the name given to Barnard, Smith, Mount Holyoke, Vassar, Bryn Mawr, Wellesley, and Radcliffe, because of their parallel to the Ivy League many unregistered trademark S colleges. In 1982 the Ivy League considered adding 2 members, with the United States Military Academy, the United States Naval Academy, and Northwestern University as the most likely candidates. If it had done so, the league could probably have avoided being moved into the recently created Division I AA for football. In 1983, following the admission of women to Columbia College, Columbia University and Barnard College entered into an athletic consortium agreement by which students from both schools compete together on Columbia University women's athletic teams, which replaced the women's teams previously sponsored by Barnard. Student demographics, geographic distribution. Students of the Ivy League largely hail from the Northeast, largely from the New York City, Boston, and Philadelphia areas. As all 8 Ivy League universities are within the Northeast, it is no surprise that most graduates end up working and residing in the Northeast after graduation. An unscientific survey of Harvard seniors from the class of 2013 found that 42% hailed from the Northeast and 55% overall were planning on working and residing in the Northeast. Boston and New York City are traditionally where many Ivy League graduates end up living. Cohesion of the group, admissions. The Ivy League schools are highly selective, with acceptance rates since 2000 ranging from 6 to 16%. These universities compete in many ways, as illustrated by Yale's aggressive reaction to an incident in 2002. A Princeton admissions staffer mentioned at a joint meeting of all 8 Ivy admissions departments that he and others from his office had logged on to the Yale admissions website to see how their system to notify applicants worked. At the time, Princeton and many other colleges were considering a transition from using mailed letters to website notification, a process which Yale had already completed. No immediate reaction from the group resulted at the initial meeting, as was the case when the same individual brought up the subject again at a subsequent conference 1 month later. He told the others present that he and his colleagues had used the names, birth dates, and social security numbers of some Princeton applicants who might have also applied to Yale. In particular, the Princeton representative brought up the topic because he was surprised to find that Yale had used no password besides a social security number. Despite the fact that the Princeton staffer had proactively volunteered the information and Yale officials at both meetings had voiced no objection, the Yale administration examined its computer records and called the FBI to complain that its computers had been hacked, then issued a press release to that effect. After this apparent attempt to embarrass Princeton publicly, the admissions official at the center of the controversy was moved to a different department and the university's dean of admissions Fred Hagedorn retired at the end of the academic year. though Princeton President Shirley Tilghman said that the dean's decision to retire was unconnected to the incident. In 2007, Princeton honored the dean by naming a new campus dormitory after him. Collaboration between the member schools is illustrated by the student-led Ivy Council that meets in the fall and spring of each year, with representatives from every Ivy League school. Social elitism. The phrase Ivy League historically has been perceived as connected not only with academic excellence, but also with social elitism. In 1936, sports writer John Kyron noted that student editors at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Cornell, Columbia, Dartmouth, and Penn were advocating the formation of an athletic association. In urging them to consider Army and Navy and Georgetown and Fordham and Syracuse and Brown and Pitt as candidates for membership, he exhorted, "It would be well for the proponents of the Ivy League to make it clear that the proposed group would be inclusive but not exclusive, as this term is used with a slight up-tilting of the tip of the nose." The Ivy League has sometimes been associated with the WASP community. Phrases such as Ivy League snobbery are ubiquitous in non-fiction and fiction writing of the 20th century. A Louis Auchincloss character dreads the aridity of snobbery which he knew infected the Ivy League colleges. A business writer, warning in 2001 against discriminatory hiring, presented a cautionary example of an attitude to avoid. We Ivy Leaguers, read, mostly white and Anglo, know that an Ivy League degree is a mark of the kind of person who is likely to succeed in this organization. Aspects of Ivy stereotyping were illustrated during the 1988 presidential election, when George H. W. Bush derided Michael Dukakis for having foreign policy views born in Harvard Yard's boutique. New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd asked, "Wasn't this a case of the pot calling the kettle elite?" Bush explained, however, that, unlike Harvard, Yale's reputation was so diffuse, there isn't a symbol, I don't think, in the Yale situation, any symbolism in it. Harvard boutique to me has the connotation of liberalism and elitism, and said Harvard in his remark was intended to represent a philosophical enclave, and not a statement about class. Columnist Russell Baker opined that voters inclined to loathe and fear elite Ivy League schools rarely make fine distinctions between Yale and Harvard. All they know is that both are full of rich, fancy, stuck-up and possibly dangerous intellectuals who never sit down to supper in their undershirt no matter how hot the weather gets. Still, the last four presidents have all attended Ivy League schools for at least part of their education: George H. W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. Cooperation. Up until recently, 7 of the 8 schools participated in the Borrow Direct Interbury Loan Program, making a total of 88 million items available to participants with a waiting period of 4 working days. This ILL program is not affiliated with the formal Ivy arrangement. Harvard and MIT joined the Direct Borrow Partnership in January 2011, together contributing over 70 million books to the existing collection. The governing body of the Ivy League is the Council of Ivy Group Presidents. During meetings, the presidents often discuss common procedures and initiatives. Competition and athletics. Ivy champions are recognized in 16 men's and 16 women's sports. In some sports, Ivy teams actually compete as members of another league, the Ivy Championship being decided by isolating the members' records in play against each other. For example, the 6 league members who participate in ice hockey do so as members of ECAC hockey, but an Ivy champion is extrapolated each year. Unlike all other Division I basketball conferences, the Ivy League has no tournament for the league title. The school with the best conference record represents the conference in the Division I NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament. Since its inception, an Ivy League school has yet to win either the men's or women's Division I NCAA basketball tournament. On average, each Ivy school has more than 35 varsity teams. All 8 are in the top 20 for number of sports offered for both men and women among Division I schools. Unlike most Division I athletic conferences, the Ivy League prohibits the granting of athletic scholarships. All scholarships awarded are need-based. Ivy League teams' non-league games are often against the members of the Patriot League, which have similar academic standards and athletic scholarship policies. In the time before recruiting for college sports became dominated by those offering athletics scholarships and lowered academic standards for athletes, the Ivy League was successful in many sports relative to other universities in the country. In particular, Princeton won 26 recognized national championships in college football, and Yale won 18. Both of these totals are considerably higher than those of other historically strong programs such as Alabama, which has won 13, Notre Dame, which claims 11 but is credited by many sources with 13, and USC, which has won 11. Yale, whose coach Walter Camp was the father of American football, held on to its place as the all-time wins leader in college football throughout the entire 20th century, but was finally passed by Michigan on November 10, 2001. Currently Dartmouth holds the record for most Ivy League football titles, with 17. Beginning with the 1982 football season, the Ivy League has competed in Division I AA. The Ivy League teams are eligible for the FCS tournament held to determine the national champion, and the league champion is eligible for an automatic bid from the NCAA. However, the Ivy League has not played any postseason games at all since 1956 due to the league's concerns about the extended December schedule's effects on academics. For this reason, any Ivy League team invited to the FCS playoffs turns down the bid. The Ivy League plays a strict 10-game schedule, compared to other FCS members' schedules of 11 regular season games, plus postseason, which was most recently expanded in 2013 to 5 rounds with 24 teams, with a bye week for the top 8 teams. Football is the only sport in which the Ivy League declines to compete for a national title. In addition to varsity football, Penn, Princeton and Cornell also field teams in the 8-team Collegiate Sprint Football League, in which all players must weigh 172 pounds or less. Penn and Princeton are the last remaining founding members of the league from its 1934 debut, and Cornell is the next oldest, joining in 1937. Yale and Columbia previously fielded teams in the league but no longer do so. Although no longer as successful nationally as they once were in many of the more popular college sports, the Ivy League is still competitive in others. One such example is rowing. All of the Ivies have historically been among the top crews in the nation, and most continue to be so today. Cornell's 38 national championships in men's rowing makes that program perhaps the most decorated varsity athletic program in the country in any sport. Most recently, on the men's side, Harvard won the Intercollegiate Rowing Association Championships in 2003, 2004, 2005, and on the women's side Brown won the team championship in 2007, 2008 and 2011 NCAA Rowing Championships, and Yale won the NCAA title for the I-8 event in 2007, 2008 and 2010. Additionally, Cornell's men's lightweight team won back-to-back IRA national championships in 2006, 2007 and 2008. The Ivy League schools are also very competitive in men's lacrosse and both men's and women's hockey. The Ivy League is home to some of the oldest college rugby teams. Although these teams are not varsity sports, they compete annually in the Ivy Rugby Conference. Historical results. The table above includes team championships won from the beginning of official Ivy League competition in the 1956-57 academic year through 2011 December. Princeton and Harvard have on occasion won 10 or more Ivy League titles in a year, an achievement accomplished 6 times by Harvard and 21 times by Princeton, including a conference record 15 championships in 2010 November. Only once has one of the other 6 schools earned more than 8 titles in a single academic year. In the 33 academic years beginning 1979-80, Princeton has averaged 11 championships per year, 1/3 of the conference total of 33 sponsored sports. In the 7 academic years beginning 2005 June, Harvard has won Ivy titles in 22 different sports, 2/3 of the league total, and Princeton has won championships in 31 different sports, all except wrestling and men's tennis. Internal rivalries. Rivalries run deep in the Ivy League. For instance, Princeton and Penn are long-standing men's basketball rivals. Puck Princeton, and Penetrate the Puss t-shirts are worn by Quaker fans at games. In only 11 instances in the history of Ivy League basketball, and in only 7 seasons since Yale's 1962 title, has neither Penn nor Princeton won at least a share of the Ivy League title in basketball, with Princeton champion or co-champion 26 times and Penn 25 times. Penn has won 21 outright, Princeton 19 outright. Princeton has been a co-champion 7 times, sharing 4 of those titles with Penn. Harvard won its first title of either variety in 2011, losing a dramatic playoff game to Princeton for the NCAA tournament bid, then rebounded to win outright championships in 2012, 2013, and 2014. Rivalries exist between other Ivy League teams in other sports, including Cornell and Harvard in hockey, Harvard and Princeton in swimming, and Harvard and Penn in football. In men's lacrosse, Cornell and Princeton are perennial rivals, and they are the only 2 Ivy League teams to have won the NCAA tournament. In 2009, the Big Red and Tigers met for their 70th game in the NCAA tournament. No team other than Harvard or Princeton has won the men's swimming conference title outright since 1972, although Yale, Columbia, and Cornell have shared the title with Harvard and Princeton during this time. Similarly, no program other than Princeton and Harvard has won the women's swimming championship since Brown's 1999 title. Princeton or Cornell has won every indoor and outdoor track and field championship, both men's and women's, every year since 2002 March, with one exception. Harvard and Yale are football and crew rivals, although the competition has become unbalanced. Harvard has won all but one of the last 11 football games and all but one of the last 13 crew races. Football rivalries, the Yale-Princeton series is the nation's second longest, exceeded only by the rivalry between Lehigh and Lafayette, which began later in 1884 but included 2 or 3 games in each of 17 early seasons. For the first 3 decades of the Yale-Princeton rivalry, the two played their season-ending game at a neutral site, usually New York City, and with one exception, the winner of the game also won at least a share of the national championship that year, covering the period 1869 through 1903. This phenomenon of a finale contest at a neutral site for the national title created a social occasion for the society elite of the metropolitan area akin to a Super Bowl in the era prior to the establishment of the NFL in 1920. These football games were also financially profitable for the 2 universities, so much that they began to play baseball games in New York City as well, drawing record crowds for that sport also, largely from the same social demographic. In a period when the only professional sports were fledgling baseball leagues, these high-profile early contests between Princeton and Yale played a role in popularizing spectator sports, demonstrating their financial potential and raising public awareness of Ivy universities at a time when few people attended college. Athletic facilities, other Ivies, marketing groups, journalists, and some educators sometimes promote other colleges as Ivies, as in Little Ivies, Public Ivies, or Southern Ivies. These uses of Ivy are intended to promote the other schools by comparing them to the Ivy League. For example, in the 2007 edition of Newsweek's How to Get Into College Now, the editors designated 25 schools as new Ivies. The term Ivy Plus is sometimes used to refer to the ancient 8 plus several other schools for purposes of alumni associations, university affiliations, or endowment comparisons. In his book Untangling the Ivy League, Zoll writes, the inclusion of non-Ivy League schools under this term is commonplace for some schools and extremely rare for others. Among these other schools, Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Stanford University are almost always included. The University of Chicago and Duke University are often included as well. See also Little 3 liberal arts colleges in New England, in contrast to the Big Three of the Ivy League, list of Ivy League medical schools. Schools of the Ivy League universities that offer medical education. List of Ivy League law schools. Schools of the Ivy League universities that offer various law degrees. List of Ivy League business schools. Schools of the Ivy League universities that offer various business degrees, especially the MBA. Hidden Ivies, 30 colleges of excellence, Jesuit Ivy Euro complementary use of Ivy to characterize Boston College. Black Ivy League UE Euro informal list of colleges that attracted top African American students prior to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Public Ivy Euro is a term coined by Richard Moll to refer to universities that provide an Ivy League collegiate experience at a public school price. Notes. External links, official website.